Hi there, and welcome again to the Explaining History podcast. This is kind of a special emergency podcast, if you will, about Venezuela. The news reports are sketchy. The picture is unclear, so anything I say needs to be fact checked a million times. I am just as capable of being wrong as anybody else. But it would appear that overnight, the United States of America has attacked Venezuela. There have been Apache gunships over Caracas, firing images of what is reported as low-flying aircraft, dropping munitions, explosions around the city and in other parts of Venezuela. And if the reports are correct and accurate, and I think they probably are, the President Nicolás Maduro and I believe his wife have been abducted. Whatever you think of Maduro, and opinions vary, whatever you think of Kim Jong-un, whatever you thought of Saddam Hussein, they are protected by principles of international diplomacy that go back to the end of the 30 Years' War. They are gangsters and thugs, no doubt, but heads of state. And the abduction of heads of state, the abduction of unelected heads of state, the abduction of heads of state that one country deems to be criminal, sets into motion terrifying precedents. And it signals, I mean, maybe I was wrong about 2025, maybe 2026 is the pivot year, but I think it has been 2025, because 2025 is kind of set up this moment here, in that the world that I think that Roosevelt imagined, ironically, Roosevelt imagined could emerge at the end of the Second World War was a world of four power blocs. What remained of the British Empire, China, the Soviet Union, and America. And they would, and his theory about what had gone wrong was that there had been essentially no kind of concert of Europe since 1914, and this was a kind of an idea of like a concert of the world. There would be a new great power status. I think he imagined that China's sphere of influence would be much of Southeast Asia and South Asia. That the British their sphere of influence would be kind of what remained of their empire in Africa and a few other bits and pieces besides. America's sphere of influence would be not just the Americas, but probably Western Europe as well. And the Soviet Union's sphere of influence would be Eastern Europe. And there would no doubt be contested places. I imagine the United States of America would not have handed over stewardship of the Middle East and all its oil reserves to anybody else. But this was the kind of a liberal imperial world vision. Roosevelt said that, without this kind of concert of great powers that get together and agree things between themselves, you have anarchy. Now, the reason why he thought four powers would bring about stability is that if one power, the Soviet Union, say, stepped out of line, the other three powers could gang up on it, and so it ensured stability. And ironically, the world he didn't want to necessarily see emerge was, and obviously didn't live to see emerge, was a dual power world, between America and the Soviet Union. At the end of the Second World War, the two other powers, the British are bankrupt and their empire disintegrates. They lose India within 2 years of the war, and the rest of the empire evaporates within 20. And then the other issue is China. China is engulfed in a civil war up until 1949, and then is in a kind of a long period of violent internal turmoil until the late 1970s. 78. I guess you can mark it as that. So you have a dual power world emerging, and that dual power world lasted until the end of the Cold War, and then, so the story goes, we have had 30 odd years of a unipower world, with the United States as the world's, some historians and theorists have called it a hyperpower, able to fight multiple wars at once. And this is now changing. During that period of hyperpowerdom, and perhaps during the Cold War itself, the idea of a Pax Americana, a global American-led kind of security in economic and cultural hegemony existed. If you live in a Western country, or a country allied to the United States, then look at the extent to which your economy and your culture has become shaped by America extensively. And this is all kind of backed by kind of very hard power military and economic realities. Now we're entering a world that Trump, I don't think, can be credited with creating. I don't think anybody creates, any one individual creates worlds or creates world conditions. But we are entering into a world where spheres of influence are now kind of breaking apart international law, where the liberal systems of world governance that emerged at the end of 1945, the idea of international law, a rules-based international order. Well, the idea of a rules-based international order tends to apply to weaker powers who come on the receiving end of that. Look at the people who wind up at The Hague, and look at the people who don't for evidence of that one. A rules-based international order is applied highly selectively. This is an old Chomsky kind of adage that if the Nuremberg laws were applied universally, every American president since 1945 would have hanged. And yeah, that is arguably true. The number one international crime, as posited by the Nuremberg judges, was that of preemptive war, preemptive aggression, or basically what we've seen in Venezuela today. George W. Bush, if he had appeared before Nuremberg, would have been convicted and sentenced perhaps to life imprisonment or to the noose for the preemptive invasion of Iraq and all the vast numbers of civilians who died there. So I think we can consign the idea, it's a sort of big and terrifying thing to say, we can consign the idea of a rules-based international order to the grave, and instead anticipate a world of power blocks. This, I think, is very, very troubling for the European Union, that has made in the last month some vague moves towards kind of strategic autonomy, but it's too little too late, I think. You have China, Russia, and America, all three of which operate or will, I imagine, operate in their spheres of influence largely with impunity. One of the great beneficiaries of this particular moment, I believe, is Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin wanted to seize a country that he believed to be in his sphere of influence, to secure its natural assets, to prevent it from drifting into an opposing power bloc, and wanted to kidnap its leader. Of course, now there is no argument that anybody who is even attempting to use the veneer of international law can present to the world to legitimize any kind of criticism of China's threats towards Taiwan. This again has presented China with a kind of a casus belli of a kind of one anyway about the seizure of Taiwan. I mean, I think Trump doesn't care, and probably is more than happy for China to do whatever it likes in its sphere of influence as he sees it. And I mean, part of the language and the ideology, and I think it's a set of ideas that will blow up in their faces, but the idea of regional power blocks and of regional hegemons rather appeals to Trump and his cohort, not only because Trump gets to act as kind of emperor within the kind of the Monroe Doctrine sphere of the Americas, but also by giving other gangsters, other thugs, permission to rule as they see fit. The assumption is they will do the same for him. They'll return the favor, because they won't want to mess up a kind of rather attractive setup with the kind of niceties of international law. It's been interesting in the last year or so, well, perhaps longer than the last few years, that China has liked to sort of position itself as a kind of maintainer of international law. They have found it very useful when talking about things like Gaza and other kind of American acts around the world, acts of kind of violent lawlessness around the world, to almost imply that China might one day look to supplant America as the kind of the guarantor of international law. And I think it's naive to assume that that's something China can or could or would do, or if they did position themselves in that way, that they would somehow replicate the America, the more liberal America of the post-war decades. In a way, America is doing things right now that it has kind of always done. Ronald Reagan and Grenada, for example, Bill Clinton and Operation Desert Fox, the preemptive and unilateral missiling of Iraq in 1998, the overthrow and capture of Noriega by George H.W. Bush, and of course the actions of George W. Bush, of which there are kind of too many to list right here. America under Trump, and this is again why he is loathed by parts of the American political establishment, is that he does the quiet part out loud. His way of operating American empire is to revel in its most kind of egregious, grotesque, violent, and criminal acts, Whereas previously, those are the kinds of things you kept quiet because they are, by reveling in them, you sacrifice a lot of soft power. You can't present yourself as the good guys. You can't present yourself as the cowboy with the white hat. You have to revel in being the bad guys. This is what I mean, and Trump does. The kind of tormented masculinity of people like him and Pete Hegseth and the various other kind of Skeletor's henchmen that Trump tends to attract, love to present themselves as the bullies, as the high school kind of jocks, as the the dangerous, psychopathic, and the immoral. And in a way, and their kind of argument to their base, the argument they present to conservative America, is this is the sort of people you have to be. You have to embrace that dark side of yourself, that dark side of your country, in order to in this Darwinistic struggle with other civilizations, to remain on top, to fight off the kind of the hordes, the enemy. And of course, it's kind of a completely demented way of looking at the world, but that's sort of how they articulate themselves. That's kind of, I don't know whether it's something as coherent as an ideology, or it's just a kind of a repressed and tormented bundle of sentiments, but it is going to have far-reaching effects on American soft power in the world. And I think it'll be hard for, if not impossible, for an America based on some sort of notion of rules-based internationalism to re-emerge after the Trump era. I think one of Trump's kind of achievements, if you will, and it's not an achievement that's going to benefit anybody else, one of his achievements is to warp the post-war America that has existed so far out of shape, to rip apart the foundations of this kind of liberal veneer, that it's irreparable. You can't come back from certain things. Just as it was impossible really for America to come back from Iraq, to kind of salvage fully its world reputation post the kind of the preemptive and unilateral attack on Iraq. And so this seems to be kind of how at least the soft power of America is finally shredded. And it's kind of how American empire itself, this Pax Americana, finally dies. What you get is a kind of a more reduced regional hegemon, one with immense destructive power still, but one with perhaps less global reach.
One of the biggest challenges of earning a degree as a military veteran is transitioning your goals and experiences to your next phase in life. National University gets it. As a veteran-founded Yellow Ribbon School, they offer post-9/11 GI Bill acceptance, dedicated military support and advising services, and credit for your military experience. That's why 30% of their students are military affiliated. NU, education that serves those who served.
And it'll be curious to see what America's allies make of this flagrantly illegal act. This morning, Chief British Toady to Donald Trump, Nigel Farage, has referred to it as, he's said all sorts of positive things about it, said, you need to be a bit robust with these things, but he's referred to it as against international law, which is quite surprising for him. And there are perhaps, even with your chief kind of toadies, limits to what they can defend. The next part of all of this remains to be seen. Obviously, the plan will be to install a pro-American government. They may have kidnapped Maduro, but does this mean that there is going to be a pro-American government installed? I don't see how that happens. It happens perhaps through two means: either a massed American invasion, as in 2003 in Iraq, which I don't know whether they've really got the kind of the at least the political will to throw at that one. I'm not sure that's going to be an easy sell to the American population, because it will involve enormous ongoing American casualties. I don't think anyone's got the kind of an appetite for that. Or you orchestrate a coup, you find pliant army officers in the time-honored kind of America in South America tradition to overthrow the government. And I doubt that that's a thing either. So again, I'm wildly speculating here, and I may well be completely wrong, and we're in a live situation. But I don't know whether necessarily this whole scheme has been thought through particularly well. I suspect probably not. I suspect that perhaps Trump is looking for some exciting theatre. It might be that there are some interesting revelations from everyone's favourite deceased high financing child abuser to come out. It could well be to do with that. But I think maybe this is more an example of how not to run an empire. This is the previous empire managers from the Oval Office have been far more kind of skilled and nuanced than this. They will no doubt fling Maduro into a jail on some or other charge, probably to do with drug trafficking, for all time. And again, they may come to regret that. We shall see. More as this unfolds. And I'll catch you later. Take good care, everybody. All the best. And if you are listening from Venezuela, stay safe. Bye-bye.
AI is transforming customer service. It's real and it works. And with Fin, we've built the #1 AI agent for customer service. We're seeing lots of cases where it's solving up to 90% of real queries for real businesses. This includes the real-world complex stuff like issuing a refund or cancelling an order. And we also see it when Fin goes up against competitors. It's top of all the performance benchmarks, top of the G2 leaderboard, and if you're not happy, we'll refund you up to $1 million, which I think says it all. Check it out for yourself at fin.ai.
Switching between tools for one project gets disjointed, especially on tight deadlines. Grammarly built a game-changing writing surface tailor-made for professionals to help you move your ideas forward and sharpen your writing. You can brainstorm ideas, summarize meeting notes in seconds, or strengthen a proposal without context switching. Easy to get started and even easier to finish. Sign up for Grammarly free and get your professional writing from draft to done. Visit Grammarly.com. That's Grammarly.com.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Explaining History. This podcast is an independent production, and it's listener support that keeps these conversations going week after week. If you find value in the show and want to help cover the costs of research and production, please consider making a contribution. You can join our community on Patreon or make a one-off donation. Just follow the links in the show notes for this episode. Every bit of support is truly appreciated. Thanks again for listening.